This afternoon, the president called the attempted bombing of a U.S. airliner on Christmas Day, quote, a screw-up that could have been disastrous. And right after the meeting, he was still very obviously unhappy. Take a look.
When a suspected terrorist is able to board a plane with explosives on Christmas Day, the system has failed in a potentially disastrous way. And it's my responsibility to find out why and to correct that failure so that we can prevent such attacks in the future. Elements of our intelligence community knew that Umar Farouk Abdulmuttalab had traveled to Yemen and joined up with extremists there. It now turns out that our intelligence community knew of other red flags, that al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula sought to strike not only American targets in Yemen, but the United States itself. And we had information that this group was working with an individual who was known, who we now know was in fact the individual involved in the Christmas attack. This was not a failure to collect intelligence. It was a failure to integrate and understand the intelligence that we already had. The information was there. Agencies and analysts who needed it had access to it, and our professionals were trained to look for it and to bring it all together. Now, I will accept that intelligence by its nature is imperfect, but it is increasingly clear that intelligence was not fully analyzed or fully leveraged. That's not acceptable, and I will not tolerate it.
Joining me now, David Gergen, who was an advisor to 4 different presidents, and also Gary Berntsen, who is a former CIA officer who's back with us as well. David, you heard the president there flat out. This was a failure. What was your reaction to his remarks?
Well, I've rarely seen Barack Obama smolder, but he was this afternoon, Campbell. He was clearly very frustrated, angry that this had happened in this way. I'm told that in the meeting, he was not hostile toward his people. He was very firm. But he said, look, this was a screw-up, but he also thanked them for those times when he has thwarted, when they have thwarted other attempts this year. I think, though, the point of all of this is, Campbell, is that the president feels very strongly, I'm told by topsiders at the White House, that, look, there are going to be, we can have a perfect system and people may still get through. But in this case, somebody got through because we had an imperfect system. It wasn't working well. And we need to clean this up. And he clearly is not blaming the CIA for the way it collects information. He said that part of it worked well. What happens is when the agency collects it, it's sent over to something called a new organization, new agency in Washington called the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC as it's called. And the problem there, Campbell, is that it's an umbrella over, like, representatives from 20 different sort of intelligence groups from around the government. Most of them have different computing systems, and to try to integrate that information turns out to be a very, very hard task. They're not bumbling people. These are smart people, but they're dealing with tons and tons of information, and making them information fragments match up is like a large puzzle. And if the computers aren't properly aligned, it's very hard to do that. So they've got a lot of straightening out to do, and it's frustrating for the country that more than 8 years after 9/11, after billions of dollars being spent on this, we still have a system that seems so porous.
And Gary, I mean, to David's point there, I mean, it's streamlining the system. This is the same thing we heard post 9/11, and clearly we're not there. We're not even close to being there.
I thought there were 2 important points for the speech. First, he walked back the release of the Yemeni prisoners. Thrilled that he did that. Good move. The second thing he was trying to do was convince the American public that he understood what the issues were, because there's been a lot of questions. There's been a lot of statements by the White House and by the president that were not consistent with the threat that we've been seeing.
Okay, let me stop you there, though, because I want to get specific, if I can, on both of those issues that you just addressed. First, you know, look at the steps that the president said have been taken so far. More airport security, air marshals, updated terror watch list.
Okay.
Hold on, stricter screening of passengers coming from countries that have a history of terrorism or sponsor terrorism. You know, if the failure was, as we just said, this connect the dots failure, or getting the information sort of streamlined into the right people, does any of that stuff make us any safer?
Not if you don't have equipment in those airports that detects explosives. the majority of the airports that we have don't have equipment that detects explosives for every person that goes through. They test some of it. So a lot of what we have are metal detectors, are scanners, but they don't necessarily detect explosives.
So this list I just read off that they've announced since this happened is sort of meaningless in terms if we're not addressing those big connect the dots and the explosives issue.
We're going to have to detect explosives. We're going to have to get people in there that are really trained and understand that what they know what they're doing, and recognize that this isn't just about technology. It's about really well-trained people who are committed to this, experienced, well-led, you know, and investing in these people over a period of time.
Guys, yeah, go ahead, David.
It's actually, Campbell, as I see it, and maybe Gary can correct me, it's a two-step process. First of all, if you collect and then coordinate the intelligence properly, you intercept the person before they even get to the screening. You stop them from going into the screening, and then if they do get past that initial stage, then the screening has to pick them up, and that's where you do need the technology, the pat-downs, and we may have to be much more invasive than we've been willing to be in the past. But is that a properly stated, Gary? Would you?
I agree with you completely. The problem is the clandestine service of the United States is not large enough to do this. The clandestine service is very small in comparison to the FBI for the job it's got to do. We need a larger clandestine service, more officers with the critical languages to do the collection that you're talking about. But then if we lose, if we don't make it, we don't catch the threat before it gets to the airport, we still need to be able to detect explosives, and that's a large investment in money in our airports.
All right, guys, stand by. I want to talk more about this, but I want to drill down on something else when we come back. How hard it is, I guess, for us to get the upper hand when it comes to Al-Qaeda. David, you've called it whack-a-mole from Yemen to Somalia. You know, how do we get these bad guys? We're going to talk about that when we come back. Stand by.